Hi, I'm Ray, back again with another episode. By the way, if you like my podcast, if you like the episodes, it'd be great if you could like them and or follow me, because the more people that follow me, the more followers I get, which is excellent. Now, loads of people, hundreds, well, a couple of dozen, all right, two or three people have asked me about the 50s, the 60s, what it was like then compared to now. The first thing that comes to mind is post. Funny enough, our postman has just been, and we are, where are we, just 12:30. Our postman can arrive any time between basically 10:30 to 2:30, sometimes 3 o'clock. There's no set time. In the early days, back in the 50s, the postman, I don't know, everyone seemed to get the post before they went to work. 8 o'clock in the morning, something like that, sometimes 7:30, 8 o'clock, which was great. Because you could all get your post before you go off to work, whereas now it's any old time. Another thing about then and now, there used to be second post. So you get your first post at, say, 8 o'clock, second post 11, 12ish, something like that. So if something didn't turn up, don't worry, probably turn up in the second post, which was great. There was even, now this is before my time, which is, you're thinking that's years ago, hundreds of years ago. No, I think it was the 40s. I don't know when. There was a third post. You could get a third post up to 9 o'clock in the evening. So you've got the kind of 8 o'clock post, the midday post, and then up to 9 o'clock in the evening, the third post. That couldn't be done now. There's not the resources. There's not the manpower, I suppose. I don't know. I suppose also there's a lot more posts now than there was back then. Even though we've now got email and stuff, I suppose you can't have postmen going out 3 times a day. But another thing about the postman in those days, they had a regular round. I remember our postman, when I was a kid, he'd been on the round forever. That was his round, and he did it forever. And of course there was a security aspect to that, because he knew every house, every street, he knew every person. Okay, so he knew that Mrs. Smith from number 10 down the road, she was up at 7. She had her curtains drawn at 7 o'clock, window open, radio on. So if he got there one morning on his round, say, 8 o'clock, and the curtains haven't been drawn and it's quiet, there's something wrong. There's something afoot. There we are. So he could then perhaps ring the doorbell, ask if she was all right. If there was no answer, he might pop into the local police station on his round. There were local police stations everywhere. They were basically just houses, which were police houses. And then perhaps the local copper could just nip round and make sure she was okay. So there was that great security aspect to it. Also, we still have milkmen in the UK, but most people now just buy milk from the supermarket. But back then in the 50s and 60s, everyone had a milkman. And it was the same thing. The milkman, he knew his round. He'd been on the round for the last kind of 150 years. So he knew every house, he knew every person, every street, what was going on. And of course, if he felt something wasn't right, then he could perhaps ring the doorbell or nip into the local cop shop. It was good. It was good, a good form of sort of keeping an eye on the neighbourhood. So any problems, would be noticed within a few hours, rather than, as sometimes sadly happens these days, 3 weeks goes past before anyone calls the police to a property and they break in and find something tragic has happened. Of course, there was also the local policeman that would cycle by on his beat, on his round. He had his beat. I remember being out the front garden many years ago, and he'd cycle by and he'd say, "Hello there, everything all right?" "Yes, thanks, yeah, fine." My neighbour once was in the garden. Brian, it was the policeman, Brian the copper. He said, "All right." And my neighbour said, "No, hang on a minute." He said, "Last night," because the copper stopped, propped his bike up against the wall, wandered over. And my neighbour said, "Last night there was a chap hanging about in the street, about 10:30, 11 o'clock last night." And he's described him. And he said he was just walking up and down looking at the houses in the street. And of course, Brian the copper, he said, "Right, okay, I'll make a mental note of that." He said, "I'll ask around, I'll ask the lads back at the Nick, see if anyone knows anything." And it was good. It was local intel, they call it, don't they, these days, intelligence. And of course, who better for local intel than people that actually lived in the street? They knew what was going on. People twitching behind net curtains, having a look outside. "Oh, what's that over there? What's he doing?" But he stopped for a quick chat and he said, that car down the road, do you know whose it is? He said, it's been parked there for 2 days. He said, I'm just wondering whether it's been nicked. He said, I might get back to the station and find out. Put the registration number, phone up wherever you did in those days. They didn't have computers. As it happened, it was someone visiting. But things like that, things were noticed, which was really good for, as I say, local intel. I remember as a kid, a couple of friends and myself, we were playing on a building site. Some houses were being built and we were mucking around one evening, climbing up ladders and generally messing around, and this copper stopped on his bike and said, "Oi, you lads, wait, come here. He was quite friendly. He said, I'm going to tell you not to play on that building site. Do you know why? I said, we looked up at him and, no, why is that, mister? He said, because I'm not trying to spoil your fun, but you could hurt yourselves. He said, if you go up the ladder, you fall down. He said, I've then got to get back to the police station. I've got to get an ambulance out here. And he said, it's all a lot of work to me to get you to hospital. He said, have your fun. He said, have your fun, but just don't do it on a building site. There's parks and all sorts. And we said, oh, yeah, OK. It was friendly. We respected the police. And he genuinely had concern for our well-being, which was good. It was nice. Also, in those days, everyone had a post office round the corner. In fact, up to only, 10 years ago, we had a local one down the road, turn right, 100 yards, there's the post office. There were little post offices everywhere. They've all gone. Talking about milkmen and postmen and things. And the local police stations have gone. It's all gone. It's disappeared. It's a shame because the community spirit, which I think is important, that's gone. As I say, without the local copper cycling past, the milkman, the postman that knows all the houses, all the stuff's gone, all the community stuff's gone. This is why they say on the telly, isn't it? Check up on your neighbours. If you haven't seen your neighbour for a while, elderly neighbour, go and have a look, make sure everything's all right. Because there's no one else these days to notice anything. Talking of TV, why is it the adverts? Why is it everyone on adverts shouts these days? Buy one, get one free. Buy one, get one. Oh dear. You have to turn the volume down. What I do is mute it. Just hit the mute button on the remote control. All these adverts shout and they're all so much louder than the TV programme you're watching. Hopeless. Things were calmer. There we are. People want to know the difference now and then. Things were calmer in those days. The children's programmes weren't all machines and lasers and stuff. It was calm. The wooden tops, Andy Pandy. But there was no shouting. Things were calm and relaxed. People were chilled. Whereas these days, I don't know, it's just loud music and shouting going on, all loud stuff, explosions and goodness knows what. The adverts then, people obviously were advertising their stuff and they were saying, buy this, this washing powder, whitens clothes, blah, blah, blah. But they weren't shouting. I remember Omo, was it Omo and Brand X? Omo was the washing powder and they compare that to kind of Brand X or something. Happy days. I used to like the adverts then, whereas now I just turn them off or just mute the thing, or if you can, just whiz on, whiz through the adverts and start the programme again. Talking of children's programmes, I remember as a kid in the 50s, we'd go over, my friends and I after school, we'd go over to the woods. There were ponds and there were fields and stuff all round. I'm living in the same town as I did, I was 5 years old when I moved here, and all the woodland, the fields, the farms, the ponds, there was a lovely lake. It's all gone. It's all concrete now. Such a shame. And of course then they say, why do roads flood? There was quite near to us some years ago, big problem with flooding on a new housing estate. Well, why does it flood? People were saying, well, that's not good. It floods because that was kind of not a flood plain as such, but there was a pond, there was a stream that ran through it. Of course, they've concreted over the whole lot. And now when it rains, that's it. It all floods. I think they've fixed it now. They've done some drainage thing. But as kids, we were able to enjoy all the nearby woodland. We were climbing trees. We were looking at birds in the woods, learning what birds were what and the flowers, the wild flowers. It might all sound soppy, but I think it was a good thing. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that everything now is horrible and everything then was brilliant. Someone said to me recently when I was talking about this episode, someone said, It's no good living in some 1950s utopia. Is it wanting to live in some 1950s utopia because I'd like to see a policeman cycling past the house a couple of times every day? I don't think so. Is it some 1950s utopia because I'd like to see kids, instead of sitting at computers or whatever they do in front of loud televisions, I'd like to see them perhaps over the woods, climbing trees, exercise. I mean, apparently obesity in the UK is now an epidemic. It's at epidemic levels. And that's amongst children as well. If they did what we did, go over the woods after school every day, I'm sure things would be very different. Talking of school, there were no lifts to school. You either walked there or you went on your bike or the local bus. There were no blonde yummy mummies in their Chelsea tractors dropping off their little precious at school. Chelsea tractor. I heard that term a few years ago. Chelsea tractor. It's these big 4x4 things, isn't it? SUVs that these blonde yummy mummies drive. Yummy mummy, that's another term that I heard a few years ago. But everyone gets a lift to school these days, which is ridiculous. Of course, the roads are all jammed up. The traffic grinds to a halt. There's illegal parking everywhere outside schools, which is dangerous. Talking of illegal parking these days, people park on the corners of roads, don't they? Actually on the corner. I thought there was a rule. Well, there is, isn't there? It used to be you can't park more than less than 15 yards from a junction. They park on the junction these days or on the pavement. What's going on? No one seems to bother about it. Of course, once you start ignoring illegal parking like that, it becomes the norm, and the more people that do it, everyone does it, and then it's too late. You can't change it. I don't know why kids have to be taken to school. I don't think I ever was driven to school. I mean, my father had a car. I can't remember ever being driven to school. Midwinter, my school was only about a mile away, but midwinter, if there's snow and ice and a blizzard type howling wind and it's freezing cold, you put your wellies on, your overcoat, scarf, balaclava. Do you remember balaclava? Your gloves, and you'd trek off to school. There was no getting a lift. Good grief, I don't know what's gone wrong. As I say, all the roads are jammed up, and you can really notice the difference in the school holidays. The traffic on the roads locally is kind of halved. It's incredible. One of our teachers, I hated school, but there was one class I did like. That was art. I was hopeless at art. But he said, draw from your imagination, draw whatever is in your mind. Okay, now remember, we're early teenagers, so we're all drawing away. On his desk up the front of the class, he's looking at us all. He's listening to a transistor radio on his desk, Radio Caroline. Remember the pirate ships, Radio Caroline? Transistor radio on his desk, can you believe it? But more, ashtray on his desk, and he's having a fag. He's sitting at the front of the class smoking. This is in the, very early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. I was, teens, so early 60s. I don't know, it was incredible. Imagine that now. Imagine the teacher up the front listening to pirate radio station on a radio and having a cigarette. Good grief. The art teacher, he wandered round to see what we'd all drawn. And we'd all drawn naked girls. Well, we're young teenage lads. It's a boys' school. And he said, draw from your imagination whatever's in your mind. I think about 90%, 80 or 90% of us had drawn naked girls. And I was hopeless at drawing. A couple of them were really graphic. I have to say, really graphic. But excellent drawings. And he put them up on the wall in the classroom. He did say I should have known better than to ask you to draw from your imagination at your age. I remember him saying that as he puffed on his cigarette and listened to Radio Caroline. Happy days, but I did hate school. I left at 14, which was a bit of luck. Ruptured my liver, fell off my bike. Left at 14 and never went back. So that was a result. Mind you, I didn't have much of an education, but I didn't listen while I was there anyway. I got the cane. Imagine that these days. If a teacher lays a finger on a child these days, the teacher ends up in court. I can't believe it. No discipline at all. You're probably thinking, listen to this old fool going on, oh, when I was a boy. No, it's good though, it's interesting. People have, as I said, at least 2 or 3 people have asked me about the old days. No, it's more than 2 or 3. I used to play truant every Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock. It was games. sports. I hated it. I remember being out on the field. I looked down at the grass. It was frozen solid, and we're supposed to be playing hockey. I'm shivering. I'm absolutely frozen. Some bloke's whacking my shins with a hockey stick. After that, I played truant every Friday afternoon. I just thought, I'm not doing this. I don't have to do this. It was ridiculous. That was child abuse. You can't treat kids like that. Force them out in the winter to stand on a field and be hit with sticks. Well, mind you, getting the cane was abuse, wasn't it? So every Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock, I'd just sneak round the bike sheds, grab my bike, walk down the drive, down to the local park and have a cigarette. And a few other kids were there as well. There used to be, 5 or 6 of us that would meet up on a Friday afternoon. One Friday afternoon, I'm halfway down the drive, wheeling my bike, keeping my head down, and I heard this voice bellow out, "You boy!" Oh dear, here we go. I turned round, and it's the deputy headmaster. I had to go back. I went back. "Where are you going?" I said, I feel ill, sir. I don't feel very well. Anyway, I got the cane. 6 of the best. Dreadful. Imagine doing that. Teacher would end up in prison. I don't know about court. He'd go to prison. There was a girls' school, half a mile away from our school, and we all used to cycle home that way, or a lot of us did. And every afternoon, was it 4 o'clock we left? I can't remember. About 4 o'clock every afternoon, there's about 50 kids from our school, 50 boys, all hanging around the gates of the girls' school. The older boys. Of course, we're all shouting and whistling at the girls, and I remember people shouting out, "Get them off! You can't do that." Wolf whistling these days, if you wolf whistle, you're going to be arrested. Is that right? I think it's illegal. Let alone shouting at girls like the way we used to. Good grief. Mind you, I was 14, so we were kids, but I think even nowadays you can't do that. My uncle, he said to me, "You want to make the most of your school days, they're the best days of your life." Well, talk about lies, talk about talking rubbish. When I left school, I got a job, radio and TV, apprentice radio and TV engineer. I was in the workshop. I loved it. And I saw my uncle, and he said, how's work then? I bet you wish you were back at school. I said, "You're joking." I said, "School? It was dreadful. Work? I loved it." I said to him, "I can't wait for Monday mornings." And that was true. I couldn't wait for Monday mornings. Back in the workshop with the lads, all the TVs on, listening to pirate radio on the radios. It was just fantastic. I really didn't like school so much that I hated Sunday evenings. The radio would be on, and that programme, Sing Something Simple, would come on. I think that was 7 or half 7 Sunday evening, and I knew that whenever I heard that programme, this is how much I hated school. Tomorrow was Monday, and of course Sunday was bath night. Can you believe that? Bath night. Nowadays people have a shower every day. Sometimes you'll have 2 showers in a day, depending on what you've been doing. Bath night, Sunday, that was it. You had a bath Sunday night, and you didn't wash. Well, you had a wash, but you didn't bath again till the next Sunday night. 7 days without having a bath. Dear me. I don't remember people smelling. Mind you, we were kids in those days. Monday morning, you wake up and your mum's put your clothes, they're folded on the end of your bed, your school uniform. I hated the school uniform. But there we are. As I say, I left school and went out to work, which was much better. Of course, Monday morning, Monday, was wash day, not just the morning. All day Monday was wash day. A lot of you older people listening to this will remember that. And you've got to be very old to remember that, like me. Wash day. You had a single tub washing machine, if you were lucky, in the 50s, early 60s. Hoover made a single tub. Hot Point did one where the agitator went backwards and forwards. You put all your clothes in. Well, no, first of all, you put the water in. You wait about 3 hours for that to warm up. Put the washing powder and your clothes in. You do all the washing. It all swirls around and does its thing. You then empty the water out. But of course, you've got to rinse everything. So you either fill the washing machine with clean water about 3 times, trying to rinse the soap out of everything, or you do it in the sink. Somehow you've got to get the soap out. But what you did first, you had a mangle. Now, on the back of this Hoover washing machine my mum had was this mangle, with the 2 rollers, 2 rubber rollers, not wood. I'm not that old. The wooden mangles 100 years ago. I'm not going back that far. So you put all the clothes through this mangle. I used to turn the handle for her while she fed the clothes through. careful of your fingers as well. You get them smashed in the rollers. In fact, there was a power mangle driven from the motor of the washing machine. That was dangerous. So all the clothes come out the other side. Anyway, eventually you've rinsed them, you've squeezed them through the mangle, you put them out on the washing line. Very often it went into Tuesday, ironing day. That's if they were dry. Don't forget, if it's pouring with rain or it's winter, you can't hang them outside. No spin dryer, no tumble dryer like you've got now. So what do? You put them on a horse, a clothes horse, not a Nedrick type horse, in front of the coal fire, the open fire, on a clothes horse, and you dry them that way. There was no central heating, just the coal fire, and that had to heat the whole house. I mean, you had electric fires and things, but of course they were expensive to run. I remember waking up in the mornings in the winter and there's frost on the inside of the window. You could scrape it. We used to draw pictures in the frost, scratch it with our nail. Jack Frost, we used to call it, on the inside of the glass. So, and of course the coal fire had gone out overnight, unless someone had got up in the night. Perhaps my father would get up, bung some more coal on it and stoke it up a little bit. If not, the house was absolutely freezing when we woke up. And of course, anyone with kids, they had terry nappies, remember those? None of these disposable nappies. And you see washing lines on Mondays and Tuesdays full of nappies, if anyone's got, babies, full of nappies. Of course, then it's all got to be ironed. You bring the whole lot in off the washing line, it's probably still damp. You have to iron it all, fold it all, put it away. I mean, housewives, as they were called in those days, it was hard work. It really was hard work. I remember my mother making the beds, doing all the housework, even doing decorating, because my father worked full time, as most men did, doing all the decorating, painting. I remember her painting the woodwork, cleaning the windows inside and out. A lot of people couldn't afford window cleaners. Baking pies, doing all the cooking, the shopping. Talking of shops, no supermarkets. You go over the local shops. I used to go over with her sometimes when I was very young or not at school. And you go into the greengrocer and you've got your fruit and veg in there. You go into the butcher, get the meat. There's a chemist shop. There's a little radio and TV, electrical type shop. There's the post office, of course. All these separate shops. We had one called the World Stores. It wasn't self-service, but they did a lot of things in one shop. I suppose that was building up to mini supermarkets that came along. It wasn't self-service, as I said, but you could buy all the tin stuff in there. You could buy loads of stuff in one shop. So it was heading that way in the early 60s. Yeah, of course, then we had small local supermarkets popping up here and there where it was self-service. Once I was at work, meeting the lads in the workshop, I discovered pubs. We'd go over the pub lunchtime. In the evenings, we'd go down to a pub or a club. There were so many pubs then. They've all gone now. There were pubs even right next door to each other in the town centre. I remember that. Right next door to each other. Pubs. One exactly opposite over the road. So there was a fantastic choice of pubs. They were very, very different in those days. No food. You didn't have food. These days, pubs are more restaurants, aren't they, with a bar, rather than a bar with a bit of a sort of food bit added on. There was no food. I remember on the telly, on the news, they were saying they're trying to introduce into pubs a little bit of food, like bangers and mash for our American friends. That's sausage and mashed potatoes, hot pies, just something to eat. So when you're standing there all night, well, all evening anyway, drinking, you could at least have something to eat. Pub opening times were very, very different back then. Sundays, the pub would open at 12, midday, and close at 2 p.m. So you've got 2 hours. Sunday lunchtime drinking, the drinking session was hugely popular. The wife's at home. Isn't that a dreadful expression? The wife. The wife's at home doing the Sunday dinner. Talk about sexist. And what is it they're always on about now on TV? They ban adverts, don't they? Because they're stereotyping people. The little housewife at home doing the dinner. That stereotype, you can't do that. Anyway, the wife was at home making the Sunday lunch. So you've got 2 hours in the pub. And then you go home and have your dinner and fall asleep for the afternoon. In the evenings on Sunday, pubs opened at 6 and closed at 10:30. During the week, I think they opened about 10:30 or 11, closed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, then opened again at 6, till 11 p.m. Whereas these days they're open, all day, aren't they? I think they're open all day. I don't know what time they start in the morning. Dread to think. Just going back to the art teacher at school smoking, I remember my mum taking me to the doctor. I must have been, 7, 8, 9 years old, had a bit of a cough or whatever. Going to the doctor's surgery, you have to knock on the door. He just shouts out, "Come." You open the door and go in. He didn't even look up. He's sitting at his big oak desk. I remember his name, but I won't mention it. And he's smoking. He just didn't even look up. He just said, "Yes." And, she said, "Oh, my son's got a bit of a cough. Bed for 24 hours, give him Disprin." Do you remember Disprin? It was soluble aspirin, I think. But he's sitting at his desk smoking, and he didn't even look up. And then you just go out and close the door. Oh, dear. No, a bit like Doc Martin. Well, no, Doc Martin. I mean, that's different. I like Doc Martin, but that's another story. Sorry about all these seagulls and sparrows chirping and squawking away in the background. Talking of birds, girls. Of course, when I first went to work, girls, I started going to pubs and clubs. Girls in the 60s, now they wore miniskirts. Is it okay to call them birds? A friend of mine, his wife and daughter, they hate the expression birds. And he blames me. He'll say, "Oh, look at that bird." And he gets told off. And he says, "Oh, it's Ray's fault. He started calling them birds." Anyway, is that sexist? I don't know whether I'm allowed to do that. Is that sexist or naughty? Anyway, they used to be birds. I don't know what they are now. But they wore these miniskirts. Now, for any teenage lad in those days, he's seeing these long legs and miniskirts. Some of them were micro skirts. They barely did anything. I won't tell you what they were called. But anyway, moving on swiftly, girls had long hair. I think I like long hair because that's the way I was brought up. Girls had long hair. And at school, boys had short hair. But of course, into the 60s, when I went to work, school was all behind me. By then, girls had long hair. And boys had long hair. So sometimes it was difficult to tell whether someone was a girl or a boy. I remember some of the boys looking, I'd go to a club, some of them looked quite pretty. You'd think, "Oh, she's all right. Oh, no, hang on, it's not a she, it's a bloke." I had hair down to my chest. When I was 18, being a bit of a hippie, I had the full beard, the moustache, the whole beard, the hair down to my chest. And I used to wear a hat with flowers in it. How about that? I was a proper hippie. And I had one of these big sheepskin type denim sheepskin coat things. And I don't know, I was just a complete hippie. I loved Jimi Hendrix. That was my music back in the day. Anyway, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the girls. Now, I expect most of you listening to this have waited, about 26 minutes, nearly half an hour, for me to tell you about the girls back then. You've listened to Postman and Milkman. I didn't mention the Coleman. I'll save him for another time. So the girls, they were fantastic. At the clubs, you could meet them, and they were chatty, they were friendly. I don't know what it's like now, of course, because, being my age, I don't go to nightclubs chatting up girls. I probably, I wouldn't be allowed in. Can you imagine? Imagine me at the door. They'd say, "What do you want? Where's your walking stick? Where's your Zimmer frame? Clear off." Goodness me. I did go to London once with a friend of mine. We tried to get into the, I won't go into that. That was a bit naughty, but it was good fun up there. So yes, the girls, they dressed like girls. They wore the short skirts, and they wore pretty clothes. Well, I thought they were pretty. The hippie girls would wear long dresses, with flowers and stuff like that, which was good. And the non-hippie girls, whatever they weren't, just ordinary girls, they wore the mini skirts. They wore knee-length boots, which looked fantastic. And on top, a blouse or some pretty top. If ever you see old programmes on the television, like Top of the Pops from the 60s, you look at the girls on there, you'll see exactly what I mean. They look like girls. I don't know. And they didn't wear jeans. I think later, was it in the 70s or 80s, these dungaree things came in, which I thought they looked awful. I thought they looked totally unfeminine. Are you allowed to say that? You can't mention the word feminine now. I don't know. It's all changed these days. Everything is so politically correct now. I mean, you can't say, "Cool, look at that bird." You look at that bird's legs. That's dreadful. You get arrested. You can't whistle. Can't do that. Remember the old building site lads they'd be up building the house, laying the bricks or whatever. A couple of girls would walk past, they'd shout and whistle. You can't do that. Goodness me. How times have changed. The pubs have gone. I don't know. The local policeman's gone. The girls are still there. I suppose they're physically they're the same, I think. I mean, I wouldn't know. I don't look at girls anymore. Actually, of course I do. Am I allowed to say that? I look at girls? Good grief. As I say, everything is so politically correct these days. It's difficult to know what to say and what not to say. I think this is why a lot of people just keep quiet. On Twitter, of course, you've got... Imagine if we'd had Twitter and Facebook and Instagram back in the 60s. Good grief. Can you imagine what that would be like? I don't know what it would have been like. I think, to be honest, I think it would have spoilt things. Thinking about it seriously for a minute. It was nice going to a club. They got a live band, playing some brilliant music. The live bands used to be brilliant then. The music was good. Here we go, you're saying. Here he's off again, that old boy. Look, ooh, when I was a boy. It's true, though. Things were very different. You'd meet a girl in a club and would you like a drink? Would you like to dance? I mean, it's not that now, is it? Is it? I don't know what it's like now. If there are any youngsters listening, perhaps you could contact me and tell me what it's like now, or point me to a podcast episode that is, I don't know, produced by someone young. I've no idea. As I said, I daren't even try. Well, I say I can't go into a club. There aren't any clubs, are there? There used to be so many clubs. I think in my hometown alone, and I'm only a hometown on the seafront, down on the south coast of the UK. It's not a big town, but there must have been, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, probably 6 or more. They were called nightclubs, weren't they? 6 or more. I don't know how many there are. I think there's one now. There's one I can think of in the town. But like the pubs, they've all gone. So sad. There were no mobile phones, of course, and not everyone had a telephone at home, a landline. And I remember on more than one occasion, meet a girl in a club, ask her for a phone number, and she'd say, oh, we're not on the phone. Lived at home with her parents. We're not on the phone. A couple of times I'd be given a phone number that was a red... You remember the red phone boxes? A couple of times a girl would say, look, there's a red phone box outside our house or down the road a bit, and you get that number and you'd have to say, all right, I'll ring you at 7 o'clock tomorrow night. And then she'd be at the red phone box to take the call. So it wasn't always that easy making contact with girls. I remember on many occasions walking past a red phone box and you'd hear it ringing. And, as a teenage lad, you go and you say hello. And someone would say, oh, hello, is that Jack? Yeah, it is, yeah. Start messing around on the phone. Whoever it was they'd arranged to be at the phone box at that time obviously hadn't turned up. So they got me on the line instead. But the red phone boxes were all over the place, almost on every street corner. Well, probably not that many, but it seemed that way. Wherever you went, there was a red telephone box. The majority of them have gone now. I think they've all gone. There are 1 or 2, I believe, still operational in remote villages. Of course, on the second-hand market, they're worth a fortune. There's one in our town, actually. It's in someone's front garden, which I suppose looks all right. I don't know. It looks a bit out of place. But, they've looked after it. They've painted it red and they keep it clean. So it's all right. I think it's got flowers in it, which looks a bit odd. There we are, red phone boxes, happy days. Signal boxes have all gone on the railway, of course. There were signal boxes everywhere. You remember the man turning the big wheel in the signal box to open the gates? That's all gone, all automatic gates now. I suppose a lot of things are for the better, really. But thinking back, I don't know. It's difficult, isn't it? You can think back to these days of long, hot summers. In reality, the summers were probably dreadful. They're probably better now than they used to be. It's funny how the memory plays tricks, isn't it? I think quite a few of the girlfriends I had weren't pub meetings or club meetings. There was the girl sort of next door, for example, the girl over the road or down the street, or someone you knew from school, perhaps then you meet his sister, whatever. There was a lot more social sort of interaction then. Nowadays, of course, it's all online, isn't it? Social media. But then it was all meeting each other. Wherever you went, there were both sexes. You were in the pub, local club, wherever. There were male and female, all ages. So you could meet each other, socialise. I had a lot of girlfriends that weren't girlfriends. We weren't intimate. They were friends. And there was a good crowd of us at one stage, male and female. I think there were a dozen or more of us. We'd meet up in the pub and we'd spend the evening there chatting and drinking. And we weren't necessarily involved with each other. You might have one or two girlfriend and boyfriends there, but in a relationship. But in the main, we were just a bunch of friends, male and female, which was really nice. I remember thinking in those days, I loved the idea of having a girlfriend. That's all she was, a friend, like one of my mates. That was really nice. Don't get me wrong, I didn't always go to a nightclub with a view to meeting a girl, being friends and chatting about politics. The 60s, of course, was free love, make love, not war, and there was a lot of making love going on, and I was very much part of it. So, yes, don't get me wrong. Another thing I've just thought of about the pubs, they were full of locals, full of regulars. That's what they were called, regulars. They probably still are. But there aren't the pubs now where you get the regulars, the regular drinkers, because, as I said earlier, they're more like restaurants with a bar, and they just don't attract the regular drinkers anymore. There is a little pub near us, a small pub that is a proper pub. It's a proper old pub as they used to be. It's not all plastic and horrible. So I don't know where the regulars go. I don't know what they do these days. Bear in mind that I'm talking about a town on the south coast of the UK. Obviously it's very different in London and probably very different in Brighton, which is only a few miles from me. So don't get the wrong idea that all the pubs in the UK are now just food places. I'm sure in London there are some amazing little pubs which are probably jam-packed with regulars every night. That's a good thing. Talking of the town, do you remember Joe Lyons, the corner house, was it, tea shop? I remember that. The waitress is in there. My grandmother used to take me there when I was a kid, and we'd have a cup of tea or a fizzy drink and cream cakes, things like that. Yeah, the waitresses had their little white pinnies, their little white cap things. Very nice. Big plants everywhere. I remember plants and things all around the place. Lots of tables, lots of people in there. There was also a coffee shop where they ground the coffee beans. You don't go in for a cup of coffee, you go and buy your beans, or ground beans. That was down near the pier. And the machinery was in the window and you could stand there and watch it. I remember seeing that when I was a kid. And the smell of freshly ground coffee, you could smell it miles away. Well, a few yards away anyway. But that was really nice. And the buses, the old buses. I'm a regular visitor to Amberley Museum, and they've got the old South Down buses there from the 50s, the very buses I used to travel on as a kid. So it's nice to see those. And of course, trains were mostly, I don't know when electric came in, but most of the trains I saw in the 50s were steam engines, which was fantastic. Sitting by the railway line on the fence. Here we go again, you're saying, here we go. When I was a boy, I watched the magnificent steam engines pulling all the coaches. Drivers would always wave, or blow the whistle, toot toot as they go by and wave. As kids, we used to go train spotting, not like the recent film, but we'd sit on the platform. We could buy a platform ticket for twopence. That's 2 old pennies. And you could sit on the platform and you'd have your little notebook and your pencil and you'd write down train numbers. I'm not quite sure why we did that. I mean, I did it with other kids, but I think I was more interested in watching the steam engines rather than taking numbers of trains. Car numbers as well. I remember sitting on a wall, jotting down every car number that went by. I mean, you couldn't do that now. There's about 5 million cars a second that go past on main roads. But then there were, far, far fewer cars on the roads, of course. There weren't potholes either. Look at the potholes now in the UK. Dangerous. Especially if you're on a bike or a motorbike. Get your front wheel down one of those, your head over handlebars, bang onto the road. Dreadful. But we used to take car numbers, and I remember once I think more than one occasion, cop car pulled up and came over. Hello lads, can I have a look at your numbers that you've taken? They were looking for a particular vehicle. And I remember once this cop looked down, he said, this number here, he said, how long ago do you think that was? And I don't know, I said, 10 minutes, something like that. And which way was it going? It was going that way, yeah, from what I remember. And it was good. That was taking car numbers actually did help the cops on that occasion anyway. I also used to sit on the wall outside our house when I was a kid. I think it was a Tuesday, that rings a bell, Tuesday. I'd sit on the wall waiting for the Corona lorry. Now the Corona lorry, do you know what that is? Do you remember that? The fizzy drinks lorry. He'd have lemonade, cherryade, raspberryade, all these different bottles of drink. And of course, especially summer holidays, the lorry was going around all the streets. He'd park outside and he'd rush indoors. Mum, the Corona lorry's here. She'd have to go out, spend money, on fizzy drinks, which were probably very bad for us, full of sugar. Another thing, talking of fizzy drinks, there was an off licence. There were lots of off licences in those days where you buy all your drinks and soft drinks as well, not just alcohol. And we used to go around the back of this off licence and climb over the wall and get the Tizer bottles. Do you remember Tizer? That was a nice drink. I think it's still around actually. We'd get the Tizer bottles and then we go around the front of the shop, take them in, put them on the counter, and you get threepence each for them. They've been talking recently, haven't they, about recycling and doing sort of refund on bottles. I mean, this goes back to the 50s. It's nothing new. It was done then. I remember the chap once, he got a bit suspicious in the shop. He said, "Where are you getting all these bottles from?" And he said, "You're drinking a lot of Tizer, aren't you?" Of course, we're just kids. We're looking at each other. We've been collecting them. He sussed us in the end because we went round the back of the shop and there's barbed wire coiled all on top of the wall. We couldn't get over the wall. And he saw us outside the shop we were walking by. He came out and he said, "That's stopped your little game, hasn't it?" Because we just ran off. They were happy days indeed. There's a lot more I could tell you, but I'm not sure how far I'm allowed to go in these podcasts. Nightclubs, girls, what is it back in the 60s, Summer of love. Make love, not war. Maybe I'll save that for another episode. I don't know. We'll see. If you like this episode and you want more, let me know, and perhaps I'll talk a little bit more about the 1960s. Also, just before I go, perhaps you could follow me. The more followers I get, obviously, the more people will listen. Also, you'll be updated with the latest podcast episodes. Thanks for listening, as always. Take care. Bye-bye.